Grigori Rasputin was born on January 21, 1869, in the remote Siberian village of Pokrovskoye, far from the centers of Russian power. His family was poor, and the land was harsh, shaping a childhood marked by superstition, illness, and constant struggle. He received almost no formal education and remained illiterate for much of his life. What he lacked in schooling, he compensated for with an intense, unsettling presence. Villagers whispered that the boy could read people's souls, sense sickness, and influence events in mysterious ways. Whether these stories were exaggerations or the first signs of what he would later become, no one could ignore the strange aura surrounding him. As a young man, Rasputin lived a restless life. He worked on farms, tended horses, and wandered from job to job. His behavior often shocked his community. He drank heavily, stole occasionally, and engaged in wild, erratic outbursts. Yet he also experienced visions, moments during which he claimed God spoke directly to him. These visions pushed him toward religion, though never in the traditional sense. Around the age of 28, after witnessing a mysterious light in the sky, Rasputin abruptly left his home and began a long pilgrimage across Russia. He visited monasteries, prayed in remote forests, and walked thousands of kilometers. During these journeys, his reputation as a wandering holy man began to grow. Rasputin eventually returned to Pokrovskoye transformed. He had stopped drinking, spoke of spiritual purity, and gathered small groups of villagers who sought his blessings. Some believed he could cure illnesses through prayer and touch. Others accused him of manipulating the desperate. His teachings mixed Orthodox Christianity with strange personal rituals, including long fasts, ecstatic chanting, and emotional confessions. Rumors spread that he practiced both healing and seduction, blurring the line between saint and sinner. The contradictions surrounding him became part of his magnetism. Word of Rasputin's unusual abilities eventually reached church officials in Siberia and later in St. Petersburg, the capital of the Russian Empire. In 1905, he traveled there to meet influential religious leaders who were intrigued by reports of miracles. At first, they viewed him with suspicion. His unwashed appearance, peasant clothing, and piercing gaze seemed inappropriate for the imperial court. But the more he spoke, the more powerful nobles became convinced he possessed genuine spiritual insight. Through a series of introductions, Rasputin was eventually brought before the imperial family. Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra were struggling with a deeply personal crisis. Their young son, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a life-threatening disease that caused uncontrollable bleeding. Doctors could do little to help him. Alexandra, desperate for hope, believed Rasputin might be the answer. When Alexei experienced a severe medical episode, Rasputin prayed over the boy and instructed the doctors to stop their treatments. Miraculously, Alexei's condition improved overnight. Whether this was due to Rasputin's presence, calming effect, or coincidence, Alexandra was convinced that Rasputin had saved her son's life. From that moment on, Rasputin became a trusted advisor within the palace. He was allowed access to areas no outsider had ever entered. Alexandra saw him as a holy protector sent by God to watch over her son. Rasputin himself understood the power this gave him, but he was careful. He rarely demanded anything directly. Instead, his influence grew through quiet conversations, a reassuring hand on the Tsarina's shoulder, and cryptic warnings he claimed were messages from heaven. For a royal family desperate to maintain stability, Rasputin became both a spiritual guide and a political shield. However, Rasputin's rise to power created a storm inside the empire. Nobles were outraged that a peasant with no education could whisper advice into the ears of the Tsar and Tsarina. Government ministers feared he was manipulating imperial decisions. Journalists published scandalous stories describing him as a drunk, a womanizer, and a corrupt sorcerer. Many of these stories were exaggerated, some completely fabricated, but Rasputin's behavior often added fuel to the fire. He visited brothels, hosted loud parties, and made no effort to hide his relationships with women who sought his healing. To his enemies, he was proof that the empire was rotting from within. The more the public hated him, the more Alexandra defended him. She believed all accusations against Rasputin were the work of evil forces trying to weaken the throne. Rasputin used this devotion to cement his place in the court. He frequently wrote letters to the Tsar offering advice on matters of war, politics, and appointments. Nicholas, who struggled with leadership during a time of national crisis, often listened. As Russia faced widespread poverty, strikes, and revolutionary movements, Rasputin seemed to gain even more control. When World War I broke out in 1914, Russia quickly suffered devastating losses. Soldiers lacked weapons, food, and proper equipment. Morale collapsed. Rasputin urged the Tsar not to enter the war, and when his advice was ignored, he predicted catastrophe. He soon became a scapegoat for military failures. Politicians accused him of sabotaging the war effort. Some even claimed he was a German spy, working secretly for the enemy. These accusations were baseless, but they spread rapidly, increasing hatred toward him. Alexandra's reliance on Rasputin only intensified the public fury. She trusted his warnings and predictions so deeply that she recommended government officials based on his suggestions. Some were completely unqualified, others were corrupt. As ministers were fired and replaced repeatedly, the government fell into chaos. Newspapers published cartoons showing Rasputin controlling the empire like a puppet master. Behind palace walls, tensions reached the breaking point. By 1916, with Russia collapsing economically and militarily, a group of nobles decided that Rasputin had to be eliminated. They believed his death would save the monarchy and restore order. Among them was Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the wealthiest men in Russia, who devised an elaborate plan to lure Rasputin to his palace. Rasputin agreed to meet, unaware that the invitation was a trap. What followed became one of the most infamous assassination attempts in history. On the night of December 29, 1916, Rasputin entered the Yusupov palace expecting a quiet gathering. Instead, he was led into a richly decorated basement room where cakes and wine were waiting. Rasputin began eating and drinking, unaware that everything had been laced with poison. The conspirators watched from the shadows, waiting for him to collapse. But strangely, nothing happened. Minutes turned into hours, and Rasputin remained alive, talking calmly, even cheerfully. Panic spread among the assassins. They had used enough poison to kill several men, yet Rasputin seemed unaffected. Whether the poison was weakened, destroyed by baking, or Rasputin's body simply resisted it, no one could explain why he survived. Desperate, Yusupov retrieved a revolver and shot Rasputin in the chest. Rasputin fell to the floor, motionless. Believing he was finally dead, the conspirators went upstairs to celebrate. But when Yusupov returned to the basement to check the body, Rasputin suddenly opened his eyes and lunged at him. Bleeding heavily, he staggered up the stairs, trying to escape into the courtyard. The conspirators screamed in terror, convinced they were witnessing something supernatural. They fired more shots, beating him until he stopped moving. Rasputin's body was then bound and thrown into the frozen Neva River. Later examinations suggested he may still have been alive when he entered the water. When news of Rasputin's death reached the palace, Alexandra was devastated. She insisted that Russia would fall apart without him. In some ways, her fears were correct. Only weeks later, the monarchy collapsed. Revolutions swept across the empire, the royal family was arrested, and the centuries-old Romanov dynasty came to a violent end. Rasputin's influence had not caused the collapse, but he had become a symbol of the empire's decay, a reminder of how desperation and fear had opened the doors of power to a man no one fully understood. After the revolution, Rasputin's story grew even stranger. Rumors multiplied, turning him into a figure of myth. Some claimed he possessed hypnotic powers that allowed him to control others. Others believed he survived assassination attempts by sheer spiritual force. Many described him as a prophet who foresaw the Romanovs' downfall. His reputation traveled across the world. Newspapers in Europe and America published exaggerated stories, painting him as a monster or a mystical healer. In death, Rasputin became larger than life, a man shaped as much by myth as by reality. What made Rasputin truly dangerous was not magic or supernatural ability. It was the power created by fear, secrecy, and a crumbling regime. He stepped into a vacuum at the heart of the Russian Empire, where a desperate mother believed only he could save her son, and where a weak ruler struggled to maintain control. Rasputin became the symbol of a government lost in its own illusions, blind to the storm gathering outside its walls. His story remains a warning about the influence of unaccountable figures in times of crisis. It shows how a single individual, armed with charisma and mystery, can rise from nothing to shape the fate of an entire nation. Rasputin began as a peasant in a forgotten Siberian village, yet his shadow stretched into the throne rooms of the most powerful empire on earth. His life was a mix of truth and myth, faith and manipulation, healing and destruction. More than a century later, Rasputin continues to fascinate the world. He is remembered as one of history's most controversial and enigmatic figures, a man whose presence could calm a dying child, yet whose influence helped accelerate the fall of a dynasty. His life shows how fragile power can be, and how easily fear can transform an ordinary man into a legend. If you'd like more stories like this one, real history, real people, and real events, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow and brings more documentaries like this straight to you.